Now, this was a strange movement because it mixed progressive politicians, labor, and a corporation. The question I had here is, what does this story tell me about the nature of race and racism in the campaign? Because what was happening is that the leaders, political leaders of Southgate and of the region, were not talking about the attack on racism that environmental justice activists were raising. They didn't talk about race at all. Hector de la Torre, who is now in the state legislature, told me, he said, Southgate is a working class city. It was always a working class city. Things have not changed. There was not a public discourse about race or racism. This was, as this anti-Robles movement grew, it was multiracial, truly so. But it also had a bunch of white xenophobes in it, who were pretty racist. I went to a couple of city council meetings where I was appalled at just the anger directed against the councilors, the anti-plant councilors as Robles dupes. And it was coming from a small number of very angry older white people and Latina and Latinos in the audience who had on, you know, get rid of Robles t-shirts, were sitting there looking not at all comfortable. As the power plant campaign unfolded in the last days, people who were canvassing around environmental justice got all sorts of racist comments. So in a sense, there was this history, no surprise, but the lack of progressive politicians who were in this and leading this coalition against Robles talking race at all sort of sent an oblique message, I believe, to a lot of the majority of residents saying, oh, all right, if the pro-plant people are also racist, then maybe there is something to environmental justice. It is racist. We're not making this up. More important, it raised the whole issue of how you talk about race once you do it. And this was a major contradiction. There were two strategies. One of them was the progressive politicians who, I believe, were modeling what they thought of as a good way of building unity. Talk about the things that bind us, let's not talk about the things that divide us. And so when Hector said, we are all working class folks in this city, that was the kind of discourse that a lot of the labor Democrats used and labor unions used. I don't think it was as effective as it should have been. Environmental justice folks talked race. Race was always there. They talked it. They had a great resonance with people on the receiving end of racism, but they also had a lot of white allies. And so what do we learn from the way this talk played among white allies? Well, I mean, America's most famous white problem is white folks' reluctance to talk about racism. So there were people who were opposed to the power plant who said, why do you have to talk about race? I mean, this is only about health, let's not talk about it. And I was sort of trying to probe and analyze what's underneath that. And it seemed to me that as people spoke, it was clear that the way people understood race and racism is as a zero-sum game. That is, if you don't put the power plant in Southgate, you're going to put it in Beverly Hills. And Beverly Hills is white, and it's going to come out of white hides. So that was a challenge. And I think that the next step to meeting that challenge was not taken in the campaign itself, but has subsequently been taken in the Ports campaign and in Green LA, which is to build a strategy around harm reduction. That is, get rid of the damn toxics. Put the emphasis on cleaning up some of the worst pollutants and start in the places where people of color who have taken the leadership in this movement have already taken leadership and bring everybody into that. And I think that is the way to go, but it involves working through and talking through racism in a way that defeats what I believe, well, it's not just I believe, Nancy McLean has written a very powerful book called Freedom is Not Enough, where she argues that neocons since the 1970s have really reformulated the way we think about race and racism and affirmative action in the United States so that it is a zero-sum game. And I think she's dead on, and I think what the Ports and the East Yards and some of CBE's newer work is doing is actually pulling the rug out from under that. That will allow a productive, non-zero-sum conversation, political conversation to take place. So, now, one final thing, why does this campaign matter? What's its place in the bigger picture of things? This is sort of what I think. I think that environmental justice as a movement has the power to link labor, economic justice into a very powerful moral campaign that has just extraordinary numbers of reach-out branches, and that this can be a trunk holding it together. It's got a moral suasion that I think we have not seen in a while, and that labor in LA hasn't seen, I don't think, since the 1990s campaigns of Justice for Janitors, where people were in the streets and made a direct moral appeal. So when HERE put hospital beds in the street, they were saying health care. And that's what got people with them. When the food and commercial workers walked out for the supermarket strike, they were able to say they're taking our health care. And people responded to that strike in ways that they haven't responded to many strikes. Many people are still boycotting supermarkets just because they leave a bad taste. So the potential for this kind of synergy, I think, is extraordinary. The second thing is that this is a movement that has the power to cross race and class lines in a way that doesn't put working class people at the tail end of a middle class movement, but rather puts them in the center and in the leadership. And third, the only thing that has the power to change the politics of the possible is a grassroots movement. And so for all of these reasons, I think this campaign sort of shows us the beginning and the potential for where we can go to build new movements. That's it.